There came a very impressive scene. An immense ball of fire fell among some beautiful mansions, causing their instant destruction. Maybe I should repeat that. There came a very impressive scene. An immense ball of fire fell among some beautiful mansions, causing their instant destruction. I read on. One of authority was addressing a large gathering, before whom was spread a map of the world. He said that the map pictured God's vineyard, which must be cultivated. As light from heaven shone upon anyone, that one was to reflect the light to others. Lights were to be kindled in many places, and from these lights, other lights were to be kindled. Jets of light were shining from cities and villages, and from the high places and the low places of the earth. God's word was obeyed, and as a result, there were memorials for him in every city and in every village. His truth was proclaimed throughout the world. I read on. Then this map was removed, and another map was put in its place. On this second map, light was shining from just a few places only. The rest of the world was in darkness, with only a glimmer of light here and there. Our instructor said, "This darkness is the result of men following their own course. They have cherished hereditary and cultivated tendencies to evil. They have made questioning and fault-finding and accusing the chief business of their lives. Their hearts are not right with God. They have hidden their light under a bushel. If every soldier of Christ had done his duty, the world would, before this, have heard the message of warning. Jesus would have come, but the work is years behind." But before we go on with this fascinating, interesting, significant, and important information, let us pause for a moment in the things as an affirmation of faith, this time in the hands of the Lord. Your ordained elder read a few minutes ago the book of James, which was the study of our Sabbath School pamphlet last quarter. The book of James, chapter 5, verse 7. "Be patient, therefore, brethren, under the coming of the Lord." And I read from our writings, "The coming of Christ is near and hasteth greatly. Get ready to meet the Lord. There is a world to be warned of the near approach of the end of all things. Let us be encouraged by the thought that the Lord is soon to return." Matthew 24, and you have all read that chapter many times with the King James Version. "When ye shall see all these things, know that it is nigh, even at the doors." And back to the writings again. The program of coming events is in the hands of the Lord. The majesty of heaven has the destiny of nations, as well as the concerns of his church in his own charge. Problems, difficulties, locally, statewide, nationwide, indeed. But let us remember, I read this again, the majesty of heaven has the destiny of the nations, including this nation, as well as the concerns of his church in his own charge. And I read again from the epistle of James that your ordained elder read a little while ago. "Be ye also patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord draweth nigh." And we move on now with another reading. The trying experiences that came to God's people in the days of Queen Esther were not peculiar to that age alone. John the Revelator, looking down through the ages to the close of time, has declared the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus. That was written originally about Esther then by John. Then we come to the statement that is found in our writings, Prophets and Kings 605. Some who today are living on the earth will see these words fulfilled. I pause a moment. It's found in 605, Prophets and Kings. It's the story of Queen Esther, the attempt of the Amalekite descendant of the king to annihilate the entire Jewish race. Genocide, like was practiced in Europe, World War II. And I remember those things. My father volunteered for the war. He was not accepted. And the reason why he wasn't accepted is because part of his work was repairing farm machinery. And in Australia, with such a small population at that time, they needed people on the farmland areas to keep machinery in operation. The statement was written in the year 1915, exactly 100 years ago. And I did a little research on the internet, and I discovered that today, according to Wikipedia, and we can smile and say, yes, there are some things accurate in Wikipedia. According to Wikipedia, and they gave the countries and the ages and the names of different people, there are currently 1/3 of a million people worldwide that are 100 years old or older. 1/3 of a million. Let us remember that that statement in Prophets and Kings was written in the year 1915. The statement was made that there will be people who will see the fulfillment of the application of the attempted annihilation of the Jewish people, a parallel to an a coming attempt to annihilate all Sabbath keepers upon planet Earth. The Bible tells us about that. Our writings tell us more. That statement was written 100 years ago, and it was said back there in the year 1915, and my father knew the year 1915. Back there at that time, it was stated there will be people alive upon this planet when these things will happen. There are only 1/3 of a million people upon planet Earth who today are alive that were alive at the time when that statement was made. This is the only statement, the only prediction attached to a timing that is given anywhere in the writings of the Spirit of Prophecy. I would suggest if only we knew it, we'd be able to see it written in the books, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, in those books back there. But there's nobody that can put it together properly, all of those dates and those times and those years. We'll never be able to assess that information accurately. Some who today are living upon the earth will see these words fulfilled. The same Spirit that in ages past led men to persecute the true church will in the future lead to the pursuance of a similar course towards those who maintain their loyalty to God. The decree that will finally go forth against the remnant people of God, you, me, and everybody else upon planet Earth who loves the Lord, keeps the commandments, observes the Sabbath. The decree that will finally go forth against the remnant people of God will be very similar to that was issued by Ahasuerus, Xerxes, in the time of Queen Esther against the Jews. The reverence of God's people for his law is a constant rebuke to those who have cast off the fear of the Lord and are trampling on his Sabbath. That very pretty, honest, serving the Lord girl who was set up in strange circumstances that we'll never understand, yet ordained by the God of heaven. She and those with her got an enactment of that law that was to annihilate the Jews in such a way that the Jews as a race were saved. There will be some circumstance upon planet Earth that you and I don't understand at the present time. When the Sunday laws come out and the death decree is attached to the Sunday laws, there will be some circumstance with some people who will turn that law and that circumstance around. Yeah, it'll be a little different from ancient times, but it will be there. So thus far in the presentation this morning, the parable of the two maps. The map that indicated what God intended would happen in the last days, how the rapid movement of the Advent people would circulate around the globe and establish a growing organization under the things of eternity. And you know, in this country, in this blessed country, 100 years ago, no, 150 years ago, 165 years ago, back there in the year 1844, there were more than 100,000 Advent believers. After the disappointment, all that was left was about a dozen. Can you believe that? All that was left was about a dozen. They got together, read the history, visit Battle Creek, visit the other places of Adventist historic backgrounds. Very interesting. So the parable of the two maps, one God as God intended it, the one as it comes in reality. And we are living in the latter days of that second map today. The affirmation of faith in the hands of the Lord. These things are our last day parable, and our topic for the day, the parable of the two maps, which has been presented, and Queen Esther and the two Sunday laws. Let's now look in the book of Revelation. And you have heard this information presented in evangelistic series, correctly, accurately, and interestingly. Revelation chapter 13. And as you turn it up in your version of the Holy Scripture, Revelation 13, verse 11 onwards. And I beheld, said John, another beast coming up out of the earth. He had two horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. You know that is bespeaking this country. And you know, back there in our homeland, I used to think that this animal was a lamb and it would speak like a dragon. And I got over here and I found that no, Americans don't believe that it is a lamb. They believe that it is a lamb-like beast. Well, at least, no, not even that. The two horns are lamb-like. And that's very different, very different. He exercises all the power of the first beast before him, causes them that dwell upon the earth to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. Yeah, that was in 1798. Napoleon had his General Berthier march on the city of Rome, take the Pope prisoner, and abolish the Vatican as an organization and as a religion. We know the story. Lateran Treaty, 1929, February 11. The Pope and Mussolini signed a treaty, the Lateran Treaty, and re-established the Vatican with its authority. We read on. The wound at the end of the verse says, his deadly wound was healed. He does great wonders so that he makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, not fulfillment total of this item yet, deceives them with miracles and so forth. At the end of that verse, he's saying to them that dwell upon the earth that they should make an image to the beast. And you remember, we talked about the image of Babylon, gold, silver, brass, iron, you know the story. Then the great image that was set up on the plains of Dura. And the third image was Sunday worship as a parallel. You will remember that was presented here previously. That they should make an image to the beast which had the wound by a sword and did live. He had power to give life to the image, later in the verse, and caused that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. Causes all, small and great, to receive a mark. Verse 17, no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark of the name of the beast or the number of his name. The number of his name is not there yet. It's coming up one of these days, sometime soon. The claim that the fast-spreading corruption in our world is largely attributable to the desecration of the Christian Sabbath. This is what is happening upon planet Earth at the present time, and is what is happening in your country, our adoptive country. There is a tremendous amount of crime, murders every day in this city. There are riots in the cities. There is an escalation of strange events in the community. They claim that the fast-spreading corruption is largely attributable to the desecration of the so-called Christian Sabbath, and that the enforcement of Sunday observance would greatly improve the morals of society. This claim is especially urged in America, where the doctrine of the true Sabbath has been most widely preached. You know, strange family laws are on the books of several states in this country. The state governor here is opposed to this strange family law. But sooner or later, it will go nationwide, I'm sure. And it seems to me as though the next one, though not necessarily tied to it, the next one, somewhere along the line, is going to be a reintroduction of emphasis on Sunday. Trouble in the world, trouble in this country. What is the cause of it? People who are breaking, they say, the Sunday Sabbath. Through the two great errors, the immortality of the soul and Sunday sacredness, Satan will bring the people under his deception. Two great errors. Immortality of the soul. When you die, you go to heaven. That's not what the Bible tells us. And that's not what happened to Jesus. When he died, he was in the tomb. When he was alive, then he went to heaven. And it's the same that will happen to us in these things. You have to be alive to go to heaven. Either live right through the events of the end, or come forth in a resurrection. And as you know, all Seventh-day Adventist believers keeping the Sabbath will be raised in that special resurrection immediately prior to the actual Advent and the general resurrection. Just a short time period in between. I read on in the information in our writings. The Protestants of the United States will be foremost in stretching their hands across the gulf to grasp the hand of spiritualism. They will reach over the abyss to clasp hands with the Roman power. The Pope's coming back to this country quite soon. It will be declared that men are offending God by the violation of the Sunday Sabbath, that this sin has brought calamities which will not cease until Sunday observance shall be strictly enforced, and that those who present the claims of the fourth commandment are troublers with the people. Communications from the spirits, devils. Communications from the spirits will declare that God has sent them to convince the rejectors of Sunday of their error. They will lament the great wickedness of the world. They will declare that the degraded state of morals is caused by the desecration of Sunday. That same policy of deception has marked the history of the Roman Church. Those who are now keeping the commandments of God need to bestir themselves. Get up and do something. Those who honor the Bible Sabbath, those who are now keeping the commandments of God, need to bestir themselves, and they should work more earnestly to delay as long as possible the threatened calamity. We sometimes pray for the end of the world. Pray that Jesus will come soon, get us out of our troubles. But that's a little bit selfish, isn't it? We should be praying that God will give us a little bit extra time so that more people can come to a knowledge of truth. We haven't reached the close of probation. Outreach activity in its various forms is still viable, and we have the opportunity of witnessing and bringing people to a knowledge of truth. Those who honor the Bible Sabbath will be denounced as enemies of law and order, calling down the judgments of God upon the earth. In free America, rulers and legislators, in order to secure public favor, will yield to the popular demand for a law enforcing Sunday observance. As the movement of Sunday enforcement becomes more bold and decided, the law will be invoked against commandment keepers. They will be threatened with fines and imprisonment, and some will be offered positions of influence and other rewards and advantages as inducements to renounce their faith. As we approach the last crisis, it is of vital moment that harmony and unity exist among the Lord's instrumentalities. We're not in the world for individual purposes in the things of religion, leading our own separate organization or people, whatever the case may be. We need to press together in God's work and more as we see these things happen. As the defenders of truth refuse to honour the Sunday Sabbath, some of them will be thrust into prison. Some will be exiled. And there's another statement that tells us they will be exiled to an island. We are told also where they will come from, and that when it happens, it will be in God's providence that is taking place that way. One of our schools will be involved in that. Some will be exiled, some will be treated as slaves. As the storm approaches, a large class who have professed faith in the third angel's message, but who have not been sanctified through obedience to the truth, abandon their position and join the ranks of the opposition. Can you believe that? I ask you a question. Are you professing faith? Do you believe the third angel's message or messages? I do. But if some have not been sanctified through obedience to the truth, they will abandon their position and join the ranks of the opposition. This is serious information. You've already had the information in this series on Last Day Events about the 5 bridesmaids, some who went to the wedding and some who didn't. You know the story. And it's very clear that a large class will abandon their position and join the ranks of the opposition. I am addressing a congregation of fellow believers, somewhere around 50 people present today. According to the statistics, 25 of you people will abandon the position. Now, I'm sure that's not true for this congregation, but it's a serious situation. Well, then you ask the question, well, how do I know? How do you know that your faith is properly grounded? That you are loyal to the Lord and loyal to His work? You know, at the beginning of the year or the end of the year and then the beginning of the year, we sometimes go in for New Year resolutions. Maybe we should have been looking at this information a few days ago, before New Year's Eve, before you made any New Year resolutions, if you did. So, okay, let's go into a little form of assessment. How do you know? Where do you stand? Well, I've got a dozen or so questions here, all of which apply to most people. And we must need to remember that family circumstances and sometimes age and health affect these things. But let's look at this assessment. Do you read the Bible daily? Currently, our denominational leadership is urging our people to read the Bible through and to complete it before the General Conference session in the middle of the year. I have been doing that, and as I discovered last night when I looked at the assessment rate on the Adventist television, I'm about half a book behind in the reading, but nevertheless up to date, almost fairly up to date with it. Do you read the Bible daily? Do you pray daily? Do you study your Sabbath school lesson regularly? Do you participate in Sabbath school? Do you observe the Sabbath appropriately? Do you take part in the church services on Communion Day? Back in the pioneer days in Australia, when the American missionaries came out first and established the Advent movement and raised up foreigners living in Australia, for our country was very young, mainly from England and Scotland back in those days. Back in those days, when it was Communion Day 4 times a year, those who had not been regular in attendance during the quarter, for various reasons, some valid and some not, but they would make sure they were present for Communion Day. And one of the important ceremonies, one of the very important ceremonies, yes, the Lord's Supper, but is the ordinance of humility. A mini, partial rebaptism, if you please. I know people who would like to get rebaptized. Yeah, okay, sometimes that's necessary. None of us are perfect. We make mistakes, and you can make it correct with God. You don't have to be rebaptized 4 times a year. You have a mini, partial rebaptism with the ordinance of humility. Read it. It's in the writings. Do you pay an honest tithe? Do you dress appropriately for church? Do you have any bad habits, sins, that you need to give up? Alcohol, street drugs, tobacco, a little affair here and there. Maybe a temper tantrum if you're young, you've got sibling rivalry. Do you support your pastors in church activity and outreach events? What is your level of commitment, both to God and to the church? Remember, there is still time, ample time, to make necessary changes because the close of probation has not yet occurred, but it will happen one day. Now that's the background and the build-up for the Sunday laws. Now let's look at the first Sunday law. I'm reading this information. Why am I reading more from the Spirit of Prophecy than the Bible? Simply because the Spirit of Prophecy gives us ample information. The Bible is the basis for these things, and the Bible information is accurate and true. It's going to happen. But if you want to know how it's going to happen, more details about what's going to take place, our writings inform us accurately and collectively. I read several statements, one after the other. Sooner or later, Sunday laws will be passed. Very soon, our nation, your nation, our adoptive nation, very soon our nation will attempt to enforce upon all the first day of the week as a sacred day. This false Sabbath is to be enforced by an oppressive law. By a national act enforcing the false Sabbath, they will give life and faith of Rome, reviving her tyranny and oppression of conscience. The more of these things are amplified in great controversy, and there will be disastrous events taking place, and there will be torture in some of the massive buildings that they have constructed. Soon the Sunday laws will be enforced. The prophecy of Revelation 13, we read that a few moments ago. The prophecy of Revelation 13, the beast with not the lamb, but the lamb-like horns, will be fulfilled when the United States will enforce Sunday observance, which Rome claims as the special acknowledgement of her supremacy. Protestantism will give the hand of fellowship to the Roman power. Then there will be a law against the Sabbath of God's creation. When the leading churches, very popular on TV, the envy of many Adventist pastors. Why can't we have big congregations like they've got? 1,000, 10,000 people and more worshiping with them each Sunday. Why can't we do that? But this is not the way things really are. When the leading churches of the United States will influence the state to enforce their decrees, the infliction of several civil penalties upon dissenters will inevitably result. To secure popularity and patronage, legislators will yield to the demand for a Sunday law. When our nation will enact laws enforcing Sunday observance, which is somewhere not very far ahead, when our nation will enact laws enforcing Sunday observance, national apostasy, more than the troubles we've got now, more than the strange family laws, national apostasy will be followed by national ruin. Not my words. You can read it in the writings. There's more than a dozen of those statements. The first day of the week, a common working day, will be set up, as was the image of Babylon. We've already gone through that previous occasions. The decree enforcing the worship of this day is to go forth to all the world. The people of every country on the globe will be led to follow her example. The assumption of power on the part of our nation in the decree enforcing the papal Sabbath will be a warning to us. It will then be time to leave the large cities. Okay, Chicago, New York, LA, Frisco, Indianapolis, not one of the largest cities. Fortunately, we live in the last street of this suburban city. Half of the next street is in Wanamaker, in the area over there. But it will be time to leave the large cities. So in summary, the first Sunday law will be assigned to Seventh-day Adventists. It's about time we got out of the cities. Some people have already done that. Churches have been established in country areas, sometimes by people, for that specific purpose. However, there is a following Sunday law. And the following Sunday law is really a re-implication, a re-emphasis, a re-application of the original law, but with a death penalty attached to it. This is what we need to look at. I'm reading Great Controversy. It will finally be declared that we are deserving of death. Another statement, Desire of Ages. It will finally be decreed that us, will be put to death. A decree will finally be issued against those who hallow the Sabbath of the fourth commandment after a certain time to put them to death. When the protection of human laws shall be withdrawn from those who honor the law of God, there will be in different lands a simultaneous movement for their destruction. Last night, watching Adventist television, which I like to do in the early hours of the Sabbath, sermon preparation was concluded, the sheets were printed out, my wife and I had a little free time. We watched It Is Written, Oceania. It is written as produced by an Australian preacher down there in Wahroonga. My wife used to work in Wahroonga at the Adventist Hospital. She was the cashier, handling the finances of the entire institution. This preacher gave the story of the French Revolution and the annihilation of the Bible for 3.5 years and the total collapse of society and murder by the thousand. He was on a barge on the Seine River that runs through Paris, where you can see the Eiffel Tower nearby. And while he was on that barge, he pointed to the water below, just near to him in that small, that low-level barge. He said the waters of this river ran red with human blood during the French Revolution. What about Hitler during World War II? It will be finally decreed after a certain time to put them to death. When the protection of human laws will be withdrawn from those who honor the law of God, there will be in different lands a simultaneous movement for their destruction. We will leave the smaller cities for retired homes in secluded places among the mountains. Mountains in Indiana? You've got to be kidding. Where do we go? I don't know. But God's hand will be protective. We will leave the smaller cities for retired homes and secluded places among the mountains. Early Writings, 282, the first Adventist book I ever read. And I don't recommend you pass it on to anybody else as the first book for them to read. But it was wonderful information to me. There was a writing, copies of which were scattered in different parts of the land, giving orders that unless the saints should yield their peculiar faith, give up the Sabbath, and observe the first day of the week, the people were at liberty after a certain time to put them to death. How did the writer see this writing? Surely not observing it on television. There was a writing, copies of which were scattered in different parts of the land, giving orders that unless the saints should yield their peculiar faith, give up the Sabbath, and observe the first day of the week, the people were at liberty after a certain time to put them to death. All right, the first Sunday law, as a parallel to Queen Esther's events, when she, as an unmarried girl, was taken into the harem of an Eastern monarch. Strange situation, but as the writings tell us, it was in the providence of God that this happened. Way back there was a similarity between the attempted annihilation of the Jewish people, because at that time they were God's chosen people. They are not that way today, because the Christian church was brought in and supplanted, replaced the Jewish people as God's chosen people. The early Christian church went down into the Dark Ages. Martin Luther and others brought in the Protestant faith and developments. And then the Advent movement came in 150 years ago. And this is the chosen work of God upon planet Earth. I read this information here as to what happens to God's people. The first Sunday law bringing in information regarding the enforcing of Sunday as a day of worship. The second Sunday law, a reapplication of the first, attaching the death penalty to these things. Now, what happens to God's people? I read again. As the decree shall abandon commandment keepers to those who desire their destruction, the people of God will flee from the cities and villages and associate together in companies, dwelling in the most desolate and solitary places. Some will be imprisoned because they refuse to desecrate the Sabbath of the Lord. Some will be treated as slaves. Some will be exiled. Many will become martyrs for Christ's sake. That is happening today. Matthew 24 tells us it would happen, and it's happening today in parts of the world where Islam is dominant. Many will become martyrs for Christ's sake. All Christendom will be divided ultimately into two great classes. Those who keep the commandments of God and hold the faith of Jesus. Those who worship the beast, his image, and receive his mark. When the law of God has been made void and apostasy becomes a national sin, the Lord will work on behalf of his people. God's love for his church is infinite. Afflictions, crosses, temptations, adversity, and our varied trials are God's workmen to fit us for heaven's abode. You know, none of us like trouble. None of us like difficulties. None of us like the circumstances that come our way sometimes. But we're told that these things can be used as God's workmen to prepare us for the things of eternity. We are aware that God is working among his people in these days. The outpouring of the Holy Spirit in the latter rain has not yet occurred. Former rain, yes, of the last days, but not the latter rain. Two great classes. When the law of God has been made void, God will work for his people. God's love for his church is infinite. And our love for the Lord's church needs to be equally appropriate. Supporting, sustaining, cooperating. Afflictions, crosses, temptations, adversity, and our varied trials are God's workmen to fit us for heaven's abode. The people of God, some in prison cells, some hidden in solitary retreats in the forests and the mountains, still plead for divine protection. It is now in the hour of utmost extremity that the God of Israel will interpose for the deliverance of his chosen. So what should we be doing today? We should be consolidating our faith, developing the church, cooperating with leadership, conference, pastoral, and spreading the gospel and building up our own faith and our own knowledge and experience. So I close with two statements. Prophets and Kings 605, find it on the bulletin and the announcement page. Some who today, 1915, are living on the earth will see these words fulfilled. There is only 1/3 of a million of those people left. How much longer will they live before this prophecy would become null and void? It has to happen before they close their eyes. Great controversy, 640. Soon there appears in the east a small black cloud. So that after these things, we have the coming of the Lord in the clouds of heaven. You, if you close your eyes, will come forth in the special resurrection to see that event. If you are still alive, you will still see it also. You know, we had the opening hymn, "The Lord in Zion reigneth." God cares for his people. God watches over his people. He watches over his church with a jealous eye. We had that beautiful music, rendered powerfully, "How great thou art." We honor God accordingly. But now we want to sing hymn number 439, "How Far From Home." When those words were written way back, there was still a future ahead. There's not very much future ahead of us today. We will stand as we sing number 439, "How Far From Home," the Advent Hope.